Welcome to the Tipping Point Show. I'm Jimmy Evans. I'm so glad that you've joined me today. I'm going to be joined today by Rabbi Jason Sobel, and we're going to be talking about Israel and all of the events that are happening concerning Russia, Israel, anti-Semitism around the world. There's a lot of things in the news that we're going to be talking about. And so before I introduce him, let me just say that Mark Hitchcock and I have written another book in our series. It's the series, What's Next? And this one is on Iran Goes Nuclear. I read an article this morning that it's believed now that they have enough nuclear material for 10 nuclear warheads right now. And so we're looking at the very real possibility of Israel bombing Iran very soon. But this talks about where Iran is in the Bible, both historically, what's happening right now, and also prophetically. And so if you want to know what's going on in Iran related to Bible prophecy, this is the book, Iran Goes Nuclear, by Mark Hitchcock and myself. You can get this on endtimes.com or on amazon.com. But right now, it's my great pleasure today to be joined by Rabbi Jason Sobel. He's the founder of Fusion Global, a ministry that seeks to bring people into the full inheritance of faith by connecting treasures of the old and new. He's the author of Mysteries of the Messiah. He's also a spiritual advisor for the very popular TV series, The Chosen, and he also hosts The Chosen Unveiled on TBN. He's co-authored 2 books with Kathy Lee Gifford, The Rock, the Road, and the Rabbi, and The God of the Way. He's joining me today to talk about Israel. Rabbi, thank you for joining me today.
Shalom. It's always great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's just the things that are happening in Israel are just absolutely, this is astounding. And since October 7th, it just seems like there's just been a seismic shift in Bible prophecy and also just an acceleration in things that are happening in Israel. And I want to get your insights today because you're so insightful, in being Jewish, but also being, a revelatory speaker. You bring so much revelation from the scripture from a Jewish perspective. And you have a perspective about this year, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. What's interesting, every Rosh Hashanah, Feast of Trumpets in the fall, we share a little bit about what is the significance of this new Hebrew biblical year that we're entering into. And this year that we've entered into on the biblical calendar is the year 5785. And it's actually the year of the hay, because in Hebrew, you write numbers with letters. There's no Roman numerals in the Bible. So every letter is associated with a number, so therefore every word has a numerical value. So this year, the year of the 5 is the year of the hay. And what's interesting, as I shared as we were going into this year a few months ago, I said, hay is the letter that embodies change. The letter hay literally changes the meaning of the word. It changes a word from indefinite to definite, meaning instead of being like Abraham's not saw a ram in the bush, he saw the ram in the bush. And so the hay is added to the front of the word to make it definite, the. The hay changes a statement into a question. But most important, the letter hay is the letter of direction. When you put the letter hay at the end of a word, it indicates direction, a movement towards something. And so what I said is that this year was going to be a year of change. And boy, we're seeing major changes.
That's prophetic.
We're seeing changes in the Middle East. We're seeing changes in America. And I also said the letter hay represents a window. So there is this window of change, I said, that's coming in our nation, coming in the Middle East.
Wow.
And what's interesting about that is, and I think this is how we're going to see how it ties into prophecy, I think very significantly, which is, I know, part of your heart, because 85, the year that we're in, is also the numerical value of the Hebrew word bitachon. And bitachon is the biblical word that means trust or security. So in Psalm 112:27, it says, his heart trusts in the Lord. Libo betach b'Adonai. That phrase equals 85. He shall not be afraid of evil tidings. His heart is fixed, trusting in the Lord, which equals 85.
Wow.
So bitachon means trust in the sense of security, and our security is ultimately based upon whom we put our trust in. Some trust in horses, some trust in chariots, but we'll trust in the name of our God. So what's the point of all that? We've been in a world where there's so much insecurity. Israel, our borders, the United States, everything that's going on. And I said there's going to be coming security for Israel, security for America. And part of that, I believe, is to fulfill, as you know, what it says in Ezekiel 38. Thus says Adonai Elohim, the Lord God, it will come to pass in that day that things will come into your heart and you will devise an evil plan. It's talking about Gog and Magog coming against Israel. And you will say, I will go up against a land of unwalled villages, and I will fall upon a people who live securely, all of them living without walls, having no bars or gates. Yoshvei Levatach, which is the same word for security, which equals 85, Levatach, who dwell securely. Kulam Yoshvim Be'ein Choma, who dwell without walls. And so what I see going on is, I think what's interesting here is that I think this is a setup. Israel, to fulfill this prophecy, has to dwell securely in the land. They've never dwelt securely in the land. October 7th was horrible, but what it did is that it set in motion what Israel has been unwilling to do: go after Hamas, go after Hezbollah in Lebanon, go after Iran more directly, and confront these. Because until those groups are dealt with, I don't think Ezekiel 37, 38, War of Gog and Magog, can ultimately be fulfilled until there is a sense of security. And I believe that that is what we're heading into, a time of security that is ultimately going to lead to what we read about in the book of Ezekiel. Now, something else that's interesting is, again, religious Jews biblically place a lot in numerical values. The numerical value of Donald Trump equals 424, which is the same numerical value of Mashiach ben David, Messiah, son of David. Right?
Wow.
So what's the connection there? It's not that Trump is the Messiah, but is that there's a messianic process that is being accelerated and set in motion at this time. And Trump is playing a key role, I believe, in setting up the security for Israel and for America that hastens the coming of the Messiah and the things we read about that have to happen in the end times. I don't know if you think I'm crazy, but there we go.
Oh, man, absolutely not. We've had this discussion on the Tipping Point Show many times with different guests, and they say exactly what you were saying. Israel's not securely dwelling in their land without bars and gates. I mean, this is one of the most difficult times in their history that they're in right now. So Gog and Magog war, which we see unfolding on the northern border of Israel right now, it's in the news every day, is all that they need is this time of rest. And I was having a conversation yesterday. I did a podcast with a guy, and we were talking about this whole issue of, when the Gog and Magog war would come. Would it be during the tribulation? And Bill Salas, who's one of our regular guests here on the show, pointed this out. And this is why I love what you just said. He said it can't happen during the tribulation because the first half of the tribulation is peace. The second half is war without peace, and God doesn't rescue the Jews until the second coming. And so in the Gog and Magog war, the IDF doesn't win it, God wins it. And so it's a time of peace, but there is obviously war, Gog, Magog. That doesn't happen during the tribulation. Now, I could be wrong, but I totally agree with what you're saying.
And no, I totally agree with you.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to happen. I believe the Gog and Magog war will happen sometime around the rapture of the church. I think the Gog and Magog war will set up the Antichrist covenant.
Exactly.
On the heels, just like in World War II, there was sympathy for the Jews, which resulted in the state of Israel. I believe after the Gog and Magog war, there'll be a sympathy, because God says, I'm going to glorify myself in the sight of the nations. And so there's going to be a sympathy for the Jews. The Antichrist, I believe, will step in around that period of time and enter into this covenant, which is going to be this incredible deal that Israel thinks they're getting themselves into, but it's a covenant with death. And so I agree with your perspective. I love hearing you talk about numbers and the biblical significance of numbers, because the Bible is such a phenomenal book, that the equidistant letter sequencing that came out years ago, it's fascinating. The way the Bible is such an incredible book. But so the Gog and Magog war, when you look at October 7th happening right now, how close? And we don't set dates, but I'm saying, I make this statement. I don't think we're living in the end times. I think we're living at the end of the end times. I think we're seeing an acceleration of birth pangs that are happening. I think that Israel is in an undoable situation related to a two-state solution that they're going to try to impose on them as soon as they can. What do you think about how close are we to the Antichrist and all that?
Yeah, look, I think we're clearly on a trajectory. I think one of the things that we see clearly biblically is how it talks about in Amos 9 that in that day the plowman will overtake the reaper. And the idea is that in the Messianic kingdom, plowing and reaping is simultaneously. So what that says is that in the kingdom there's an acceleration. But what that means is that as we head to the closer we come to the Messiah, the more things accelerate. And that's what we are seeing in the world. We are seeing every month, every year, we're seeing things accelerate, whether it be a proliferation of knowledge, of rise of rogue empires in the world, of biblical prophecy being fulfilled. It's very clear that the train is quickly moving down the tracks and it's heading in a certain direction, and the train is not going back into the station. So I think on the one hand, I do think we have this season of a reprieve of grace, of some great things happening. But I think underneath it all, as good as it is or good as it looks on the surface, it is really a setup for what is to come. And so again, I think, this connects to prophecy. So one of the things that is so interesting, of course, this war with Lebanon, because Gog and Magog war happens on the northern border. And I think part of what's happening with this war in Lebanon is that it's meant to awaken a messianic expectation and hope. Because one of the things that I think there's a biblical principle, and part of that biblical principle is the end is going to be like the beginning. Whether it's literally the book of Revelation, a return to the Garden of Eden, what was lost is restored, death is swallowed up by life, river of life, tree of life, all these things. But on another level, it's also the book of Acts, the beginning of the body of Messiah, the beginning of the church. And so one of the things that or beginning of when Yeshua came. So one of the things we see is that when Messiah came, there was a huge messianic expectation. And so there has to be, before the end times, there has to be this messianic expectation. Now, here's the thing. Christians have had that messianic expectation historically, but Jews minimize that messianic expectation, because every time we focused on the coming of the Messiah and we're wrong, bad things happen to us. That goes back to the first century when Jews revolted against Rome because they thought Bar Kokhba, this first century military leader, was the Messiah. And we're expelled from our land. And Jews like, look, let's not focus on the coming of the Messiah. It's a foundational principle of faith, but let's not speculate, because whenever we speculate, it leads to bad things for us. And so there was a diminished expectation, although always a belief, but not a sense of expectation, eminent expectation. Well, I got to tell you, most rabbis today are like, we're living in the footsteps of the Messiah. You hear rabbis talking, Orthodox rabbis talking about Gog and Magog and coming of the Messiah like we've never heard before. It is becoming more and more mainstream for rabbis to talk about this. So this is significant. This is not insignificant. And then you have this Gog and Magog focus on the north, where Israel is fighting Lebanon. And this is meant to awaken that expectation. So what's interesting is that the fall of Lebanon as an enemy of Israel is directly connected to the coming of the Messiah. So Isaiah chapter 10 says this: "Behold, the Lord Adonai Tzevaot, the Lord of hosts, will lop off the branches with terror, so the tall ones will be cut down and the lofty ones laid low." Isaiah 10:34. "Yes, he will hack down the thickets of the forest with iron, and Lebanon will fall by a mighty one." Here's what's crazy. V'halevanon be'adir yipol. So it says Lebanon will fall by a mighty one. The word for mighty one is the Hebrew word adir. Well, what's the name of the new Israeli F-35s that have been key in this war? They're known as the Adir.
That's amazing.
Right? And it says he'll cut down with iron. And this current Israeli operation is called Iron Swords.
Oh my
And
gosh.
now this wasn't chosen because they knew about this reference to Isaiah, because in Israel there's a computer system that generates the names of these wars that are chosen randomly. A group of generals don't come up with the names. It's generated for them. And so the rabbis see the destruction of Israel's enemies as a harbinger to the coming of the Messiah. In fact, there was an article in an Israeli newspaper that said the spirit of Messiah wafts over the skies of Lebanon and the Gazan tunnels. Now, why do they make that connection? Because it talks about Lebanon falling by the Adir in the end of Isaiah chapter 10, verse 34. The very next chapter, Isaiah 11:1, we know what it says. Then a shoot will come forth out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch will bear fruit out of his roots, and the Spirit of the Lord will rest upon him. Isaiah 11:1 is talking about the Messiah. So the fall of Lebanon, Isaiah chapter 10, is connected to the coming of the Messiah, Isaiah 11, chapter 1. This is why the rabbis in the ancient Midrash say this: why must I learn from the Arabs? Is it not an explicit verse as it is written? Lebanon will fall by a mighty one, Isaiah 10:34, and it is written immediately after, a branch will emerge out of the trunk of Jesse, a shoot from his roots, Isaiah 11:1. So based on the connection between Isaiah 10 and 11:1, Lebanon falling is directly connected to the coming of the Messiah.
I have never heard that before in my life. That is amazing. Yeah, and I love the fact that you're saying that, you know, Israel's been so beat up for so many centuries, millennia, is now they have hope. There's an unusual hope in the return of Messiah. Talk about the Temple Mount for just a minute, because these are the Temple Institute. Are they Orthodox Jews?
Yes.
Yeah. So we were there a couple of years ago, but they have everything ready. The Orthodox Jews. I mean, it seems as though they've never been this ready in 2,000 years to rebuild the temple.
Yeah. And one other thing before we jump to that, because just the numbers, so Lebanon in Hebrew, Levanon, has a numerical value of 138. The Hebrew word semach, which means branch, equals 138. Why is that important? Because one of the main names of the Messiah, Isaiah 11:1, it's a branch will come forth. There it's the word netzer. That's why he's called a Nazarene, because it's connected to a netzer, Isaiah 11:1. That's how that prophecy is fulfilled. But the synonym for netzer, branch, is the word semach. And the book of Zechariah, Jeremiah, talks about a semach, a branch. And semach is one of the names of the Messiah, according to the rabbi. Well, Lebanon equals 138. Branch, meaning the name of the Messiah, the branch that comes forth, the messianic branch, equals 138. Ben Elohim, son of God, equals 138. And Menachem equals 138. So the semach, who is the messianic branch, who is the son of God, 138, will give rest, 138, from Lebanon, 138. Geula Hagia, a redemption has arrived, equals 138. So when Lebanon falls, redemption is about to arrive. And the word Hatzlacha, which means success, triumph, prosperity, Psalm 118, Ana Adonai, Hoshiana, Lord save, Ana Adonai, Hatzlachana, Lord bring salvation. Now is what they cried, those verses at the triumphal entry, quoting Psalm 118. So all of this, even numerically, supports this idea of Lebanon connected to the Messiah, connected to redemption coming. It's even there in the numbers. Now, what you're saying, I think, is true. Whether it's the desire among the Orthodox to prepare for the temple, like, I love going to Israel. We love taking groups to Israel. God willing, we'll be back there in April leading a group. And when you go to Kikar Zion, like when you go into the old quarter of the old city, there is a giant gold menorah, $3 million behind this glass, which they believe is going to be used in the temple. Again, the red heifer being restored. You can't have the temple without the red heifer, because you need the ashes of the red heifer to purify the individuals and the vessels from spiritual impurity so that they can even officiate in the temple. Again, training of the priests, the beginning to practice sacrifice, the creating of the garments, also the reinstitution of a modern Sanhedrin, which is ready to be in place. And why is that important? Because from a rabbinic Jewish perspective, the Messiah, if someone says the Messiah, and now in Jewish thought, it has to be confirmed by the Sanhedrin. Now, so from an Orthodox Jewish, I'm not saying from a biblical perspective, from an Orthodox perspective, there's now a Sanhedrin that can do that. So yes, everything is being set up. I think even the Abraham Accords is part of that. And I think what's interesting is that in Saudi Arabia, they built this complex where there is a mosque, a church, a synagogue, and it's an Abrahamic worship center or Abraham worship compound. See, I actually believe that could be a model for what is agreed to on the Temple Mount.
Yes, absolutely.
That they say, okay, you know what, it says in the Bible, my house will be a house of prayer of all nations. Now, we interpret it one way, but I think the way the Antichrist will come and bring peace is by twisting that verse and saying, yeah, house of all people. We'll have a temple, we'll have a mosque, we'll have a church. This is the center of Abrahamic faith. Let everyone worship their God the way they want to worship him. And they'll come to some sort of compromise on that fact. Because I don't believe that, like a lot of archaeologists believe that where the Dome of the Rock is not actually where the Holy of Holies stood. Because it doesn't line up with the Eastern Gate. So if that's the case, then, if it's not on that spot and it's on another spot on the Temple Mount, hey, build something there. There's a lot of room.
Well, Revelation 11, John says, I was given a rod to measure the temple, but not the outer court, because it's been given to the Gentiles to trample underfoot for 42 months. And so that makes sense, that there could be a church, the Dome of the Rock, whatever. So let's go back to Lebanon for just a minute. So when you're saying the fall of Lebanon, would the fall of Hezbollah equal that, or is it the actual nation and government of Lebanon?
So again, what I want to be careful and I want to be clear about this is that I think what happens is that biblically there can be multiple mini fulfillments that are a sneak preview to the ultimate fulfillment. So I think the fall of Hezbollah and a cessation of hostility with Israel that begins to usher in a time of peace, again, is a key harbinger that redemption is on the way. It's not the ultimate fulfillment, but it is so maybe the way to look at it is like this. It's like dominoes that have to fall, right? It is some of those, it's one of those dominoes that is a key domino that has to fall that leads to the triggering of other dominoes in pretty rapid succession.
Tell your wife hi for me, and I want to get you back on, because every time you're on here, it's just fascinating. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you for being a subscriber to Tipping Point. If you're not a subscriber, go to endtimes.com right now. You can become a subscriber. But Rabbi Jason Sobel, you need to get his materials. You need to get more information about his ministry. Go to Israel with him, and maybe someday we'll go together. But God bless you. Thank you for being here today. Bye-bye.